Hey everyone, welcome to our third episode for Laundry List, where we talk about some of the finest product managers and uncover their journey so far and what they're working on currently. So today we have a very special guest, Mikhil Innani, and he's joining us from India. He's currently the CEO of Apollo Finvest, which is a digital NBFC powering almost 35 plus fintechs in India. And as the name suggests, so Apollo Finvest is at the center of both technology, the tech stack of a startup, and also the regulatory compliance, or the regulatory ecosystem of a financial institution. So first of all, Michael, thanks for joining us today. Like super excited to have you on board. So why don't you talk a little bit about your exciting journey so far, and like what do you do apart from being a CEO or a co-founder uh, in India?
All right. Thank you so much, for the warm introduction. Maybe what I'll do is take a step back and, give you guys a little bit, a quick 5 minute journey of my career so far. And then we can dive right into, whatever questions you guys may want to discuss, right? I think, so I started off my, professional career, probably, 10 years or so back now. In 2011, I graduated from CMU. And really, for the last 10 years or so, I've been building digital companies in India. So I started off, in a tiny little company called Coupon Dunia. So I was the fourth employee in that company. And this was really Internet 1.0, right? Where, things were just getting started. There were e-commerce was the hot thing at that point in time, and many e-commerce companies were there, Flipkart, Amazon, Snapdeal, so many, right? Like many of them who don't even exist at this point in time, but that's that era. um it was a super exciting journny. In about 18 months or so, we went from like a 4-person team to like a 200-person plus person team. um Unfashionably back then, we were actually a profitable tech startup, and we got acquired by Times Internet. So that was my first taste of actually, seeing what an acquisition basically looks like. And gave me really good insights into actually how do you go about building a team and driving towards end goals inside a company, right? So that was a great learning curve. And pretty much after that, I went on to start my own company. So I went on to start a company called as PharmEasy. PharmEasy today is India's largest online medicine delivery company, and a lot of things worked in our favor at that point in time, where I was able to get employee number 5, 6, and 7 directly from Coupon Dunia to join me ground zero at PharmEasy, right? And that was a huge, I think, huge benefit to us, because it just we just had great chemistry, right? A day, day zero, right? And that's one of the secrets, I think, when you're doing a startup, right? I think uh, there are so many things which are ambiguous inside a startup. One of the things you should solve for in terms of killing ambiguity is just having great chemistry with your initial team, right? Where you hire from your network, and hire from 1 degrees of separation, where at least your strengths and weaknesses and your team members' strengths and weaknesses are no longer a surprise. And that was like a rocket ship for us, at PharmEasy, of course, because we had so many known faces around us. It almost felt at that point in time, I remember thinking that this just feels like exactly how it felt at Coupon Dunia, but just under a different company name. And it's just a different project that we are all working together on, right? And that helped us really zoom past any competition which was really there. And again, that was like a rocket ship. I think within a couple of years or so, we had raised over $100 million in equity capital from premier VCs in India, and well on a trajectory to make PharmEasy what it is today. uh, at that point in time, I got an opportunity to exit, and I took that opportunity. Um, really post that, an interesting offer came my way, which was this was Hotstar. And again, Hotstar at that point in time was a very young company. I remember thinking that time they had less than 10 people in product and engineering, and actually their entire tech stack was completely outsourced to Accenture. But their dreams were big. They actually wanted to, make this into like $1 billion OTT streaming company, and you know, obviously, if you want to build $1 billion tech company, you can't have your tech outsourced, right? Um, so that's where they got me in. They really, had the dream that basically, whatever you built at Coupon Dunia Farm Easy, just, replicate the lighting in a bottle here as well, and, get the same people that you kind of worked with there, and, help us build this out. And for me, it was quite exciting because, initial days, even in the initial days of Hotstar, right, they had about 7 million monthly active users, which is very exciting for me, right? Because I think for me, until that point in time, I was building very, very early stage startups where, 7 million users would probably be what we would see in a matter of, a year or so rather than in 1 month, right? So, uh, was very exciting to take such a challenge on, right? And little did I know in the next couple of years, that 7 million number would go to like, 350 million monthly actives. And, basically you could say at that point in time we had like 60% of the smartphones in India had the Hotstar app installed, right? So we became almost like the default television for people on their smartphones in India, right? And that was exhilarating, right? And even today I say this, that if you want an experience in India, right, which is about raw scale, I don't think there is a single company which competes actually at the scale of Hotstar, because while we were there, we literally were breaking Guinness World Records, right? Like I remember the first time we had the India Pakistan match streaming, we broke the Guinness World Record for the most number of live concurrent users on a video stream, and that is about, I think, 10 odd million users which were live streaming, the match at that point in time, right? And it was amazing because we literally had, by the way, people from Akamai and Google, by the way, in our office. Google to actually, check, how we were actually doing dynamic ads at that kind of scale, because they themselves had never done that at YouTube. And Akamai, it feels even funny saying the story, but literally Akamai was in the office to ensure that we don't break the cellular network in India, right? That's yeah, it's as insane as it sounds, because when we were streaming this, right, imagine having so much bandwidth being consumed by the smartphones pretty much in India, and the bandwidth, of course, is limited, right? All the sum of its parts, can't go beyond a certain number. And I know a lot of people, at that point in time used to complain to us saying that, why are you reducing the quality of the stream, right? Because we used to start at 1080p and 720p at that point in time, and get it down at massive scale to like something like 400p or so, right? And a lot of people used to be like, why is the stream not being high quality? And the reason was literally we had legal obligations to reduce the quality of the stream, because if we didn't do that, the cellular networks in India would go down, right? And Akamai was in our office making sure we actually followed protocol. So yeah, just some insane times there, and obviously that's grown strength to strength at this point in time. It's gone obviously across different countries as well. Launched Hotstar in UK, US, and now I think they've launched a lot of countries ever since I moved on as well. Um, Obviously, Hotstar literally had like a fairy tale ending. The Mickey Mouse company, Disney, came in and acquired us, acquired the entire Star company pretty much. And obviously, the crown jewel for them was Hotstar. So had a fantastic journey there, and really after that, my entrepreneur itch was back. I wanted to build something of my own. I think once you do that, it's very, very difficult to not do that again, and very tempting to go back in. And that's what Pole of Invest has been all about, I think, for the last 5 odd years now. So Pole of Invest, we're a little bit of a non-traditional startup. We're actually listed on the Bombay Stock Exchange, and what we do, like you aptly put it, we're pretty much AWS for digital lending. So what we provide is basically APIs, software, and obviously the regulatory, uh, licenses along with the capital to help, fintechs basically, lend to their end customers. So we become everything that you basically need to kind of go to market essentially, right? And it's been a very, very rewarding journey so far. We've worked with, I think, almost 60 plus fintechs in the last, 5 odd years, worked with amazing entrepreneurs, and this journey really is all about, going after and, achieving the financial inclusion dream in India. A lot of the experiences I had at PharmEasy and Hotstar specifically, just pointed towards certain macroeconomic facts in India, like, 90% of India doesn't have access to formal credit. Um, and a lot of people basically accuse startups in India to just ape startups abroad, right? I think, in the financial services space, what I found is it's quite the opposite. Actually, startups are the ones who are actually building for, Bharat basically, and it feels like the traditional financial services ecosystem in India is pretty much built for, as if they are present in the US as an example, because they're just catering to the top 10%, of, citizens in India, which feels kind of absurd. So, if obviously India has to grow, financial inclusion has to be front and center, and that's what this journey is all about, creating, democratizing really finance and especially credit, and enabling pretty much anybody to start offering, credit to their end customers, using our infrastructure, such that, money flows more, freely in the ecosystem. And, it's pretty simple, right? If I've been able to build amazing companies because, somebody believed in me, they essentially gave me credit. And if we can do that, for the next generation in India over the next, 10 odd years, that'll be very satisfying. So that's a little recap of what I've been up to.
Thank you so much, Mikhil. Your journey has been very exciting. Like you have like been a CEO, then you have been head of products, and then you were at Hotstar, you were director of product, and now you also co-founded pharmacy. So what were the skills which were very common in these roles? Like one you mentioned was ambiguity, dealing with ambiguity. But from your experience, what were the skills which were common, and what were the things which differentiate these different roles?
Great question. So I think, all of these roles kind of, required, um, or helped me hone certain different kind of skills, right? So I think when I started off at Coupon Dunia, right? Like, I think very honestly, I would say, like, the key skill set that I had over there was, hungry to learn, because I was very, very, young. I was starting out my career at that point in time, and I wanted to surround myself, very frankly, with people, who were much more smarter than me, right? So I could just be a sponge and just learn from them, right? And I remember, like, one of the things I always say is that, the founder there and CEO Samir, like, he was amazing at basically, building great teams, right? And to me, like, building great teams is like, when you combine great people with great IQ with great EQ, right? Like, teams basically which had great culture, right? And before then, to be very honest, I just read this in books, right? Like, you have to create teams with good culture and things like that. But how do you actually do that, right? That's what I really learned there, right? Like, I mean, if I zoom out, I would just say that's the key skill set, which I learned over there. I think at PharmEasy, I think, I took a lot of my learnings there about creating great teams. But, very frankly speaking, I think when you're doing early stage startups, right, you do need good teams. But most importantly, what happens, especially during early days, is that, the founders really have to be, very honestly superhuman in terms of ability of working hard, right? Because there is no escape from that. And very, very in the early days, I do believe very strongly that, founders can actually make the difference, and teams can serve sometimes as just hands and legs, right? They can help you get done, stuff. You can, use them to get more stuff done. But in many ways, I compare it to, an Iron Man movie, basically, right? Where, Tony Stark alone can just, uh, basically defeat the enemies, right? Essentially, he does have, you know, um, a variety of, I would say, sidekicks at that point in time, but they aren't really, like a Captain America and things like that, right? You can make do with like, side characters or, smaller characters as well. So that's how an early stage startup really is. But great chemistry is critical, right? So, I always emphasize the fact that when I got people on board from, Coupon Dunia, that was our special sauce, right? The fact that, we were focused on the problem, not solving internal problems as to like, what are each other's strengths and weaknesses essentially, right? So that was a huge unfair advantage, for us day zero. But I think if I look back at Hotstar, right, I think it was what I realized very early on, and one of the mistakes which I made when I went into the company initially was I replicated a lot of the things I was trying to do at FarmEasy into Hotstar, right, which was putting myself into that Iron Man position and being like, I'll handle the whole thing, right, and that's just not possible at a company at massive scale, right, because I think. One of the smartest things I did at that point in time is realize that this isn't an Iron Man problem and this is an Avengers problem, right? Where you need basically to form like your exec team before you do anything else, right? Because the problems were so big there that if I tried to solve them, I would probably solve one problem great and nine problems suboptimally, right? And we just didn't have that kind of margin. So the first things pretty much I did over there, pretty early on was set up like the main key team, right? And I literally call them like my co-founders. So right from, head of technology to head of machine learning to head of data sciences to head of HR, right? I literally dived into my network and, um, pretty much, made phone calls myself and got these people inside the door because, that was key, right? And once I had people who I could, who I could trust, right? I literally used to say this to people that, before you enter, the doors here, those problems in your division used to keep me up at night, but I'll be sleeping now very peacefully. These are all your problems now, right? I deal with my problems, you deal with your problems. And, I think at a company at Hotstar scale, you need that, right? You need basically people who you can trust, right? And hand off problems, and that they'll do them justice, essentially, right? Um, so this was the biggest learning that I had basically at Hotstar, that you have to have the ability to build great teams with people, who are doing certain things significantly better than you, right? And you have to be able to trust them to do their job so that you can do yours, right? And that really worked wonders for us, right? Because then each division had their own leader, and essentially all those problems were laser focused towards that particular leader, and that leader was laser focused on those problems, so they could solve them in an A+ way rather than me solving 9 problems in a B+ way, right? So this was really the key learning for me, really at at a place like Hotstar. And I think at Apollo, I would say that the biggest takeaway so far really has been a combination of all of these things, right? Like now at Apollo, I try to basically not only have a team with great chemistry where I can I have leaders who I can really trust, but I also combine that now with a co-founder who also now happens to be my wife. But we both have basically exactly same goals professionally, in our career, in terms of what we want to achieve with this company, right? And if you have a great team who you can trust and a co-founder who is exactly same way wired like you in terms of what do they want to achieve professionally with what we are trying to do here, you kind of become unstoppable, because this kind of chemistry, this kind of clear direction thinking, um, it really works wonders. And at Apollo, one of the things we really pride ourselves on is making sure every leader has clear KPIs, essentially, right? Which is 2 or 3 key things that you have to really work on, right? And pretty much what we try to do is kill the noise, right? Because what tends to happen in a lot of companies, right, is that as they kind of scale up, um, people tend to basically, chase after individual agendas, right, to try to make themselves look better. And they don't do this um, purposely, they do this inadvertently. Because if you're in the marketing department, as an example, you may chase something which makes the marketing department look good, right? But that necessarily may not align with the company's goals, right? So again, this is something which I did day zero pretty much at Hotstar, was that there was so many people inside the organization that the only way to make sure that we were all going in the same direction is set up a quantifiable KPI for the next quarter or so, right? Maybe 3 months, 4 months, whatever. But do set up one number which basically makes sure that everybody in all divisions are running after that one thing, right? So there is 100% clarity, right? And what this immediately does is that tells everybody that if you do have an idea or if you're executing something, you better have a thesis as to why what you're doing is going to positively impact this particular KPI. And as a product manager as well, right, you're going to basically be in a situation where 20 different people from 10, 20 different departments are going to come to you with ideas and really push you to get this stuff done, right? And you'll have to justify why you're saying yes to certain ideas and why you're saying no. But when you do something like this, you unify everybody's direction, and people come to you with ideas and they have to have a thesis as to why this idea contributes to your larger thesis, essentially, right? And then you're just basically evaluating it on two things, right? One, what is the probability of this idea moving the metric that you want the most? That's point number one. And point number two, what is the difficulty in actually executing something like this? And basis of these two things, right, effort and impact, you're able to basically make these decisions as to, out of many ideas coming to you, which ones do you actually execute. And in this way, you make everything extremely professional, right, and not very personal. Because that tends to happen, like a lot of people feel like you don't ever listen to me, and you have these human feelings also that you have to deal with as a PM, right? And you actually kill that completely by making everything very, very merit driven. And this is something which I highly recommend to every PM out there to do, to kill any kind of hierarchy other than meritocracy when it comes to executing ideas.
This is like I can't even tell you how much relatable it feels, because like I've just joined the company, and these are all the issues which I like see in my daily routine. So it's like very, very helpful. I wanted to like specifically ask about your experience at Farm Easy. So like you like did talk a lot about having the right set of people with you when you're like building something new. So when you're like starting something which is like absolutely zero problem, you don't know like where it's gonna go. You have like literally no clue, you just have like a vision. So how do you bring all these people who are doing so good in their life before that to join that mission that you like want to pursue? How do you bring everyone on board with your idea?
Yeah, I think very honestly, right, at that point in time, the only thing you have to sell is yourself, to be very frank, right? I think people don't join companies at that stage, for a company, for an investor, for an idea, right? I think it's a myth that people join because they resonate with the idea. There are people on the street who have so many ideas, right? Like, people don't join it for a random person idea. I think people join you for, they believe in you, right? They believe in, that, you as a team, with them are going to be able to conquer whatever it is that you think, right? Like, that's the mentality that people have at that early stage, right? That, we'll figure it out, right? Because I think one of the most obvious things in any startup is the fact that, every startup is going to start with an idea which looks like X and going to end up at an idea like Y, right? It's like when you're doing a startup, it's like you're looking at the top of an iceberg. But, as pretty much everybody knows, that below the sea, like, below the ocean floor, you actually see majority of the iceberg, right? It's like deciding to do, I always tell this to people, right? When you're doing an idea, the only thing which is probably certain to some degree is the domain, right? But the idea can fundamentally change in the next 1 year that you actually do this, because your first 1 year in doing a company, right, is basically like you doing a PhD, right? And one of the biggest mistakes that an entrepreneur can do is, or even an early stage employee, right, can do is get married to the idea, right? The only people that you should get married to, when you're doing a startup essentially is, uh, the customers, right? Have a target audience in mind, right? And the goal should be to build something valuable for them. That's really it, right? So fix on two things, right? One is the domain, second is the target audience, right? Once you're able to do this, then you will be like a monk, right? I always tell people, like, when you're building a product, be like a monk, where don't build stuff for yourself, right? This is the biggest issue which happens with startups, is most entrepreneurs are actually building stuff for themselves. And I know this is a popular thesis out there that you should build for yourself. Actually, that's not true. You should build only for your end customers, right? Because many times, and this happened with us at Farm Easy as an example, right? Like when we were building this, every investor in town, and in fact, a lot of our friends and family told us that nobody would buy medicines online. And to be very honest, even us as founders had this question, right? Who would buy medicines online? Because before that, the most common way to obviously buy medicines was just going offline to your nearest chemist and buying them. And the most common thing that people used to keep telling us is that if you have a cold or a fever, who's going to wait 24 hours for a delivery? You just go out and buy the medicines from your nearest store. And we absolutely believe that, right? We believe that that thesis may hold true. But the only way to kind of understand what would work and what would not work was basically doing a quick experiment, right, and seeing what's actually working, right? And this was really the thesis. And to get people on board at that point in time, I remember when pitching to the early stage employees at Coupon Dunia, the only pitch I made to them was that, listen, like, I'm going to be building something, right? And this is roughly what the idea looks like. I think it's really interesting. I think, we have a good co-founding team together. You guys should come on board. And we've had great fun working and building, Coupon Dunia. So why not continue the journey, at Farm Easy, and let's figure it out together, right? And I think that was pretty much it. Like, I mean, people very honestly started working, with us before there was even a formal company, right? While we were in our previous jobs, actually, we started building this stuff, right? I remember, like, by the way, where I'm sitting, this is like my dining table, and on this is where actually Farm Easy got started, right? I remember this room was completely full of developers at that point in time. For 2 weeks, basically straight, right? Barely we slept. We were essentially just staying here. I remember my mom thinking, what is happening, right? Because her house had completely been ransacked by 10 pretty much very very young boys, building away and capturing her living room. And she was pretty annoyed because she couldn't go to her temple and do her puja in the morning. But that was really it, right? Like, where people didn't have a company, there was no rock solid idea. It was just like, let's build something, let's put it out into the world. And the the thing which is key is that you have to be very very quick at things, right? You have to basically, you can't build perfectionist products at an early stage startup, right? I think some of the things that people say are absolutely true, where if you aren't embarrassed by version 1 of your product, it's already too late, right? You should put out something as soon as possible. What most people actually are really really poor at is distribution, right? Selling and distribution is something which I feel like, this should be, if I had to tell entrepreneurs to do one thing really well, it's selling and distribution, right? I think most people today, especially with engineering backgrounds, are builders by default, and builders actually suck at selling, right? Most builders suck at selling because they like building, because building is fun. Building is where you get to build cool stuff and get to jam with your colleagues and do fun stuff together. But what actually is the is facing reality is distribution and selling, right? Because that's so hard, right? You're going to go out there and build, you'll build something, you'll go out there and people are going to call your baby ugly, right? And it's the acid test, right? But I think that's something which you should get to as soon as possible, to see if what you're capturing is signal or noise, right? So I think, yeah, just few pointers. And how do you think about something like this?
Yeah, I think these were few of the things which we also wanted to cover. Firstly, the thing which you mentioned, that how to filter good feedback and bad customer feedback. Like maybe if you can talk more about that, like how did you do specifically at maybe at pharmacy or some other product? Like how did you filter out good and bad customer feedback?
Oh yeah, I mean, the simplest way to do this, right, essentially is that, what we did, everywhere, right, pretty much, at Hotstar or, a Farmeasy, and of course at Apollo, we do the exact same thing. The most important thing to do is that, whatever is the key metric at your company, right? So as an example, both at Hotstar and at Farmeasy, right, the metric used to be, frequency, right? So as an example, at Farmeasy, it could be frequency of ordering. At Hotstar, depending on the KPI that we're choosing, it could be, the people who are actually either consuming Hotstar the most, or it could be premium users who are actually paying us and at the same point in time are consuming the most, right? So you basically identify your power users, right? Once you identify your power users, at that point in time, there is a very simple thesis you should do, and a structure in which you should conduct the interview, right? Where firstly, right, for every single PM, just talk to your users. If you spend 70% of your time actually talking to users and 30% of your time implementing, you're golden, right? And the way to actually talk to your users is not asking them what you want to, what do you want, because they'll always say, I want something faster and cheaper, right? That's not very useful. But what you should actually do is essentially understand their journey, right? So understand what do they like, understand their entire life cycle. What do they do before they use your product? How do they exactly use your product? What did they do before they were using your product? And what do they do after they use your product, right? So let me give you an example of how we did this at Farmeasy. So when we were talking to our power users at Farmeasy, where people who are basically ordering the most, we actually went and asked them, what do you typically do before you order medicines at Farmeasy, right? And the answer used to be typically, either I find the prescription that I need, or I go to a doctor for a visit. We're like, fine. The next thing what you do is, what did you do before this, right? So before this, people usually generally call up the chemist and place the order, or go physically to a chemist and get the order, or sometimes even require a diagnostic, right? Because the doctor may say that you have to get these tests done. They'll go to a diagnostic and get those tests done. You're like, okay, what do you do typically after this, right? Typically after this, once you get the medicines, you'll either keep reminders of when to eat the medicine, or people will kind of think of, okay, I've got the medicines, let me quickly Google what do these medicines actually mean, and just for general knowledge, right? What we pretty much did, right, at Farmeasy was we built the central use case, right, which was like ordering medicines or acquiring medicines, and build that very, very deep, right? And what I mean by that is, when we were building something like this, the biggest problem you could have is that the basket would not get filled. And what I mean by that is, if you have a prescription which has 10 medicines on it, it's very difficult to procure all 10, right, in India, because it is such a fragmented market, and sometimes you may have only 8 out of the 10 medicines, right, available. But the key thing that we actually solved for is by actually doing a lot of vertical integration with variety of distributors in India, actually try to fill the basket to at least 90%, in the earlier months itself. And now obviously we're able to do 100% pretty easily. But that was the key thing that we actually worked with to solve the problem deeply, right? And once we were able to solve that problem deeply, we were able to get the trust of the customers that if you were to order medicines from Farmeasy, you would get the entire basket. Number one, number two, you would get the cheapest price, of course, because we were acquiring and doing these kind of things at scale, which was again never done before in India, right? Like I remember at that point in time in Bombay, there is a chemist which is in a very large hospital here called Nanavati, right? And they used to do about 7 crores of revenue, or $1 million of revenue a month, right? At that point in time. And, we got there, I think, in a matter of 8 months, right? So we became the largest chemist in Maharashtra, right? Who just happened to be online, right? And that gave us crazy economies of scale. That's why we were able to actually get that 20% discount, because we were effectively becoming the largest chemist, right? We just happened to be online essentially, right? And once we solved for that particular use case and were able to get the trust of customers, right? And our power customers, once we analyzed them, they ended up becoming personas, which were people who were actually above the age of 35, right? 35 to 50 became our power customers because, again, this was against the common thinking in India, because generally internet companies in India targeted users who were 18 to 35, right? Because they were tech savvy. For us, the target audience actually ended up becoming people who were above the age of 35, because turns out chronic illnesses like diabetes, high blood pressure, things like that, right? They are very common obviously in the older ages, and for them, if you're able to basically reliably get medicines every single month seamlessly, like almost like a subscription plan, and secondly get them at like a 20% discount, which is way cheaper than they were able to get it offline, it became a killer use case because they were saving like 2-3 thousand rupees every single month, right? Which to them felt like they're saving 30-40 thousand rupees a year. It's insane. And unfortunately, at that point in time, these are for them, these are medicines that they'll have for the rest of their life, right? So genuinely, pharmacy at that point in time for them became like the next best thing since sliced bread, right? It was just phenomenal for them, and they became uh, our biggest advocates, right? They used to literally go out, when they're going for a morning walk, they're going to their gyms, any social place, right? They used to actually, all they used to do is talk about pharmacy, right, and promote it amongst their friends who they know would love this use case as well, right? And in India, of course, like saving money is associated to being smart, right? That's the social signaling that people do, that hey, I'm so smart, I know of this app that through which I'm saving money. And that became our anchor use case. Once we identified this anchor use case, right, the where we actually went around and actually you know kept on building this use case, right, is identifying and attacking different use cases across people's journey, right? So at the central use case, which was obviously ordering medicines, the parallel use case again, which was quite centrally after visiting a doctor, was actually doing diagnostic tests. So we actually added diagnostic tests again at pharmacy, again scaled that up to the point in time where we became the cheapest diagnostic lab, again, which happened to be online and at the convenience at your own home. uh, Became the cheapest guy in Maharashtra basically doing this stuff, right? And obviously, as we basically scaled, locations everywhere, we ended up becoming the by default smartest and cheapest choice, right? And of course, the most convenient as well. And we kept on building this use case, right? Now, one of the things with obviously with Farmeasy was the fact that we couldn't actually do online marketing at all, right? So I always tell this to early stage startups that turned out to be a blessing for us, because that forced us not to be lazy, right? Because most entrepreneurs are actually very lazy when it comes to marketing, because again, sales and distribution is hard, right? So people will usually go to Facebook, Google, and just donate money to them, essentially, right? And I have this rule right now with marketing agents and marketing companies that I work with, is that don't give me ideas a 10th standard kid would have, right? Don't come and tell me do online marketing on Facebook and Google, because that's just it's done, right? That those channels are done, and it's not something I would pay a person to tell me, essentially, right? So at that point in time, what we did, right, was a couple of things, right? One is that we actually identified and talked to users, our power users, and understood how they talk about pharmacy. What are some of the keywords that they use, right? And created a marketing campaign using the customer's voice, right? Because again, what happens a lot of times, right, is that you tend to describe your company in a manner X, but you think of your company in this way, but your customers may think of your company or describe your company in a matter Y. And the best marketing campaigns, are able to basically give your power customers voice and amplify that, so that it ends up attracting similar customers who resonate with what these people are saying. It's almost like giving all of your power customers who are as it is talking about you a microphone, right? That you are our marketing campaign, whatever the way you talk, we'll just amplify that everywhere, right? So all of us have had that feeling about a product where we see an ad and we really resonate, and we're like, that hits a chord, right? You feel like, oh, this is exactly the use case, or this is exactly how the problem that I'm looking to solve, as an example, right? why does it feel this way? It's because all of these companies actually understand what are people doing with their product the most, amplify their voice so that other people like us who may have similar feelings feel like, oh my god, this is exactly the thing which I wanted, or this voice just sounds like it's speaking to me, right? And that's where you want to go out and buy that product or get that product, right? And that's exactly what we did at PharmEasy. And the way we actually went about and distributed this also is we created a referral program which gave amazing benefits to our customers, where they just went and amplified exactly in their words what they wanted to actually say. And the more and more people that they converted, obviously we got we gave them more and more benefits, and at the same point in time, even the people which came on board, we gave them the same kind of benefits as well, right? Any kind of marketing campaign that we did, whether it was on radio channels as an example, or we did like offline marketing campaigns near old age homes as an example, or as an example, in walking parks as an example, right? Targeting where our actual demographic will be there. But the voice that we put out there, right, was that of the customer, and that really basically spoke to our audience base, right? And gave us some of the best conversions which I have actually seen in any kind of marketing campaign being done by different kind of companies, right? So these are just few key principles that you must kind of keep in mind when you're building a product and scaling it.
Yeah, these are super exciting. Like whenever I have thought of like doing customer interviews, they were mostly from the perspective of understanding the pain points, like the general notation, right? Like I have never thought of building the marketing campaign out of like hearing what the customers are talking about. I think these are very useful, and like I think everyone would appreciate these. So I think like we are almost towards the end, Mikhil. So like we wanted to like a touch upon a little bit again, like going back to your journey and the decisions that you have made so far. So like you have moved from like different industries, starting from like Coupon Dunia, like Hotstar, PharmEasy, now like in a fintech world. So like were you very conscious of like switching industries while making these moves, or you rather went for like the role or the interesting opportunity that came your way?
Yeah, very honestly, I've just got attracted to where I found great people to work with. To be very honest, right? Like and this kind of stuff can never be planned
Yeah.
in any way, right? I think for me it was always like where I found like the most interesting people to work with. At Coupon Dunia as well, right? As an example, I just had great chemistry with Samir there, and I remember in my first conversation with him, we literally our interview was over playing a game of FIFA on PlayStation, basically, right? So I mean, when you have those kind of when you connect with somebody in those ways, and you really want to work with them because you feel like you'll have a good time doing so, right? And I think even obviously when we built PharmEasy, one of the people which was very very close to the company at that point in time was my roommate actually from CMU, right? So again, people is the signal essentially, right? Everything else is again unpredictable and kind of noise, right? At even at Hotstar, right? The promise for me over there really was going out and building my dream team, where every single amazing person that I had heard of, or at the same point in time I had the chance to work with in the past, I could, get them on board day zero, right? And obviously the kind of scale which was there, I know I could attract the kind of people that, I wanted over there. And, so then it was a combination of people and obviously the problem statement itself. And I think, with Apollo, I think, again, right, it was a combination of like, the signal really was the chance to basically redefine an entire industry, right? And to me, like this one is a little bit personal because I feel like um, India. I mean, if India as a country has to move ahead, right? It can't be okay with the kind of it frankly feels like financial oppression, which is there in India, and it feels kind of systemic, right? So this one has to be like something which is permanently uprooted pretty much in India, right? Because if we open up these taps, I think we will it will unlock insane growth in the country, right? And ultimately it's like creating a tidal wave which impacts, many years later. And I always keep saying this, right? Like with Apollo, like, it is obviously a startup and things like that. And but the reality is that, I always tell people that I wish there were like 100 Apollos in the country, right? And happy to help other entrepreneurs create something like this, because the problem is monstrously large,
Yeah.
right? It was the same thing at Farm Easy. Like we felt we would love there for there to be competition, because affordable healthcare is is an India problem, right? It's not a problem for one entrepreneur to solve, right? It is the same way today. Today we're happy because Reliance is entering this space, Tata is entering this space, and that's the kind of firepower this space needs, really. And imagine if affordable healthcare in India just becomes the norm.
Yeah.
That would be honestly the biggest achievement for PharmEasy, right? Not what PharmEasy is able to do itself, but the kind of movement that PharmEasy basically created. And we created an industry which people now have the confidence to invest billions of dollars behind, right? And that's the same idea behind Apollo, right? Of course, we're successful, we're doing great, all of those things are fantastic. But I think I will count this journey successful for me is when, what we've done becomes so validated that, we have, 3-4 other billion-dollar companies, lasering onto an opportunity like this, and, going after this with all that they've got, because that's when, we'll be confident that, financial inclusion in India is no longer like a topic at seminars, but it's actually
Yeah.
something where there are strong case studies that how a country like this went about and killed this entire concept of financial exclusion by using technology at scale.
Very, very interesting, Michael. Like I'm not sure, like if you have any question, like one very important question for me, which I wanted to ask is like your move. So you decided, like you did your master's in the US, and then you made a choice to go back to India and like start your professional career there. So I think a lot of us, like a lot of people coming from India to the US and like studying over here, we always have this question among us. If you can like talk about that decision and like were you sure about that before, or how you made that decision?
Yeah, so for me, very honestly, right, like for me, when I came to CMU, right, my plan was always that I wanted to kind of immediately go back. And it was very honestly at that point in time, it was a massive leap of faith, right? Because for me, very honestly, I just thought about it very simply put, where where are the largest problems between the two countries, right? And it's pretty obvious that today, at that point in time, India had massive gaps, right? And always I've had this thesis that in a country like India, when you compare it to the US, right? In US, a lot of the times the technology is all about convenience, right?
Yeah.
Like I think in India, our technology is a necessity, right? Because we are such a massive population, and it's just not possible to do things physically, to build something and solve something at scale, right? It just unit economics never makes sense. So, you know, technology has the power to, make everything equal, right? Because the cost of delivery becomes, free pretty much, right? And then anybody can kind of, come online and use your services pretty much, right? And I think a country like India, if we look back over the next 50 years, I'm pretty confident that, technology companies in India will grow strength to strength, because these companies will be built on necessity rather than convenience, essentially, right? And that is so important, right, to build long lasting companies. So this is the thesis which I had at that point in time. Obviously, when I came in at that point in time, startups were absolutely, word like startups didn't exist, by the way, in India at that point in time. There were just small obscure companies. That's how they were known as. It was very very unfashionable to work in one, at that point in time. I remember, like, you know uh, pretty much my friends and family were like, what is this company that you're working for? Like, why would you leave, US and come here? And what is the thought process behind any of this? Everybody thought, I was pretty much crazy. Actually, other CMU folks also, thought I was pretty nuts to do something like this. I remember literally, post our graduation party, on the same night, I had we partied till like I think 3-4 a.m. and I had a flight at 6 a.m.
Oh
So
my God.
in the same suit that, I partied in, I basically, flew from Pittsburgh to back to Bombay, right? So, um, but let's put it this way, right? Like it's now I feel personally, it's not even a thesis. Now I think to me at least, it feels quite obvious, to be very frank. And it depends, right? Like it depends on what are your personal aspirations, right? Of course, it's amazing that you as a person can have two different lives, I feel, right? Like one life is basically where you work for prime companies and have those kind of experiences. And maybe the trajectory is you work in those companies and, at some point in time, you basically dive into startups. But the second trajectory is you dive into startups and you kind of make your home there. Um, and, there is no wrong or right? Because everything, I mean, these are personal decisions. Um, you know, but I always say this, right? If you are interested into the world of startups, I at least firmly believe that you should spend time inside startups, right? Because the learning that you have, inside a startup is very relevant to when you're building a startup or going to another startup. Large companies sometimes are not great, basically, for going into a startup because sometimes, and I've seen this with other founders as well, right? When they've come from very large companies and then doing a startup feels very alien because, at large companies, you have divisions for everything and everything is kind of, everybody is doing very, very focused stuff, and it's not like one, you're not jack of all trades basically, and that's sometimes very critical to being inside a startup because you're not just doing one thing. And then doing a startup where you suddenly become responsible for 20 different things which are not always correlated feels like, what is this? Like, this is very chaotic, and there's no structure, right? And it feels very alien. So it depends, it depends totally on where you kind of want to go. Uh, I always tell people, like, if you're from, amazing universities, like CMU as an example, right? To me, and I'm just going to be very candid, right? I feel like, the benchmark really is, I feel, greatness, right? Like, because, this is, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity that you've gotten into, like, one of the best schools there ever is, right? People who are around you, by the way, in CMU, I assure you that, your roommates or your, the batch which is around you, right? These are going to be people who 10 years down the line are going to be, going to be A+ people in your industry, right? They're going to be leaders of industry, right? I'm confident of that, right? If you have this kind of group, essentially, right, of people together at one place, you should be inspired to do great things, right? Like, I feel like, going to, as an example, getting a job, right, as an example, in one of the fine companies, right? I feel that is honestly something you would get at any point now in your life because you're from CMU, right? I think, people want to see, when you're hiring, right? You want to see for, is the person smart? Is this person hardworking, right? Both of these traits are very obvious from a, if the person is from CMU, right? And this is why, by the way, people go to these amazing institutes and hire, because these are two main signals, right? Learn, teaching somebody, stuff, the million people you can teach. But is the person hardworking and basically smart? The answer is yes, when get people from these universities, and the probability is much higher. So, you'll get these jobs for the rest of your life, right? But now is the time where you've got these amazing degrees and you're surrounded by A+ people to go after, like big problems, right? And go after ambitious things. Be Spider-Man, right? Jump off buildings, do those kind of things, because you have a safety net, right? If you fall, you'll fall into, I don't know, you'll fall into Apple's lap or Google's lap, right? Like, that's what will happen pretty much, right? And a lot of the times what ends up happening is, when you take that entrepreneurial leap and you work on a startup, you grow multifold with those experiences. And what a person learns over a job in 5 years, an entrepreneur learns probably in 6 months, right? Because that's what it is basically, right? And the worst case is that you end up becoming a very, very valuable team member at some other startup or some other, massive company, right? So I always tell people that, if you are, from great universities, live the best version of your life, right? And go after all of your dreams today, right? Don't wait. If you want to do a startup, either do the startup like now, or go into an early stage startup, get that experience so that you have transferable skills to do your startup whenever it is that you're ready. But yeah, to me, I don't feel it's a risk at all, right? Personally, right? I think there is, again, there is this very unpopular thesis that, oh my God, what happens? You do a startup, you fail, so what, right? Basically, you will end up, the failure case over here is you end up doing a job at an MNC or another startup where you're valued very, very highly and getting paid double of, what your other, friends are, who are doing a job in the first place would be doing. So in the long horizon of time, right, over the next, you should make decisions always like thinking 10 to 20 years into the future, right? And when you keep this thesis, I think all signs will point towards learning. And when you think only on the spectrum of learning, essentially, right, your decision making will always be correct.
I think this was very helpful, especially the point which you mentioned, right? Like India has larger problems than US, and as an entrepreneur, like entrepreneur mindset runs behind larger problems rather and solve those problems. So this is quite helpful, and especially today, I have learned quite a lot. Like there were so many insights, and especially I was very curious to know about like your step moving back to India, and like how did you decide that and how do you feel about it right now. So that was pretty helpful, and the entire call helped us in understanding different aspects of product management. So thank you so much, Mikhil.